Good morning, NASCAR fans. Happy Canadian Thanksgiving to any Canadians out there, and happy Talladega weekend. The playoffs continue. Last week, Kyle Larson got his first win in almost 2 years. First guy to lock his way into the next round. So he doesn't really have to worry about much today. He's not great at Talladega anyway, so I won't be much on him. Morning, Steve. Thanks for showing up. Kind of missed last week. Been a little crazy near the end of baseball season and start of NFL season, just watching this Carolina-Tampa Bay game right now while I'm going through some stuff. Weather is a bit of a concern at Talladega today. It looks like we get some rain. Looks like actually the rain has stopped. It was more this morning around like 10 a.m. So about a half an hour ago, it looks like the rain had possibly stopped. So it goes through track drawing. There's no lights here, so they would need to get the race in. I think lineup lock today is 2 p.m. Eastern. So the race by 2:30 Eastern, they're probably looking to start it by. So I wouldn't think it would be much longer after that where they would have to get it going before they tentatively or they move it into Monday afternoon to get that race in. But just kind of looking at the forecast, I'm going to share that here in chat. I use Windfinder is the one that I use, and this is right from the Talladega airport. Right at race time. Now I'm just trying to figure out if this is Eastern time or local time. I believe this is going to be Eastern. Yeah, so we're looking not much wind. We've got mid 60s temperature. There's actually 0% or zero moisture showing until later tonight. So I don't know. I would say there's about an 80-90% chance we get this race in. Even if it's not on time, I don't think it's going to take very long for the track to dry, given how much rain they have got. It doesn't look like they get a whole bunch there. I'm also watching the NASCAR news channel here as well. Mostly Bob Pockrass. Follow him pretty religiously, giving updates on what's going on at the track. And he's saying, yeah, the tentative plan of the race does not get in today. Will be 2 p.m. Eastern on Monday, but he seems pretty confident it's going to get in today as well. So let's get in. Let's talk about the race. So we got super speedways. It's no longer plate racing, which it used to be called for Daytona and Talladega. They use that spacer now, so it's pretty much the same thing overall. It's still super speedway racing. We're still going to see a lot of teams working together in terms of the draft. So that's one thing that we're going to look towards, when building lineups, is maybe getting a couple teammates in together, 3 teammates. Had Hendrick go out there and sweep the pole yesterday, so they look extremely fast this weekend. Now, the only problem is when you start looking at winning lineups from years past at these Talladega races, we generally only see 1, maybe 2 drivers who start top 10, just because place differential is really huge. You can move through the pack really easily with the draft. So, the first thing to note, I guess, here would be that Denny Hamlin will be starting 40th. He was on his warm-up lap in qualifying, blew an engine right before he got to the start-finish to start his qualifying lap. So he didn't actually get a qualifying run in. So he's going to, for fantasy, he's going to start 40th. And in terms of having to change an engine, he'll start from the back as well. So it doesn't really matter there. It's going to be super chalk. Starting 40th at a race like this, and he's a really good touchdown, Christian McCaffrey. Love to see it. Love to see it. Anyways, back to the super speedway. Hamlin's been pretty good on the super speedways. Looking at his overall track record here, he's got 4 top 20s in the last 5, top 5, and 2 top 10s there as well. He's got a 14.2 average finish, which is actually up there among the leaders. That would be 6th best, 8th best among drivers. 2 of those drivers, Ryan Preece and Daniel Hemrick, they've only got a 1 race sample, so keep that in mind as well. All the celebration garbage, I agree. Give the ball to the ref and move on. Let's keep playing. Some of them are pretty entertaining, but yeah, it kind of wore itself out last year. So I'm definitely looking at Hamlin. He's going to be, I think, the highest owned guy, probably pushing 70-80% owned in cash. Should be higher, I would think. For GPPs, he's going to be in the 60 to 70% range. So you kind of got to make a decision, I guess, depending on how many lineups you're building, whether you want to really go all in on that, or whether you want to, go underweight on him, or whether you just want to completely fade, being that there's so much variance here at this track, which, I'm all for all of them. Myself, I'm going to have a lot of exposure. out there. So give me 2 seconds here. All right, just had to adjust things there. Sorry about that. So getting back, yeah, place differential is going to be king here at this. I'm going to go look some stuff from previous races. Chase Elliott won the race here earlier this year. He started 11th. Eric Almirola won the playoff race here last year. He started 4th. And then Joey Logano last year started 9th. Or sorry, 2018. Yeah, that was the spring race in 2018. So when looking at these races, when it comes to correlation, very low correlation start to finish. And then as well, when we start breaking down how many drivers started top 10, finished there, we've actually only had 4 drivers in 5 of the last 6 races who started top 10 and finished there. That other race, there was 5. Most of these races, the high correlation races that we've talked about in the past, you're usually seeing about 7, sometimes pushing 8 of those drivers that start top 10 with track position being so huge. That is not the case here. Place differential is huge. So on the flip side, drivers that have started outside the top 20 and finished top 10, we've had 4 in 4 of the last 6 races as well. 5 in one of those as well. So just wanted to get across the place differential is going to be key. Coming through the field is good. So when you're building your lineups, definitely concentrate on only using 1 or 2. I wouldn't go 3 in any of my lineups using drivers that start top 10. I'm going to be limiting that at 2 in most of my lineups and 1 in most of those. So if I do, say, 10 lineups, I would say in all 10, I'm going to have at least 1 driver start in top 10. Drivers with 2 or lineups with 2 drivers starting top 10, I'm probably looking at going about 4, maybe 5, maybe half of those lineups. I would say 50% of them I'm going to use 2 drivers starting top 10. And that just for a couple simple reasons. I'll get into the drivers here shortly and explain why. So I mean, most of my builds are going to start with Denny Hamlin starting 40th. Just makes a ton of sense with that elite place differential value that he gives you. You've also got all of the top drivers. You got Kyle Busch starting 26th. You got Martin Truex Jr. starting 18th. You've got Kevin Harvick starting 15th, and then of course Hamlin starting 40th. So if Hamlin takes that ownership, I think Kyle Busch probably comes in second just because he's got the second most place differential upside of any driver, 9K and up. Actually, he's got the most place differential upside on DK when you're talking in terms of drivers 8K and up. So he's definitely going to be chalk. And then we got Martin Truex Jr. Kevin Harvick might fall on. He had a fast car throughout all of practice. Whether you put a whole bunch into that or not, like a lot of times guys are out there running single runs for qualifying, then you get teams that are out there and they are out there working on, in traffic and working on the draft that their teammates they're going to work with. So I don't really particularly look at some of that practice times as much. But Kevin Harvick starting 15th did show some speed. He hasn't been great here either as Martin Truex Jr. lately. Same with plate tracks in general. So those 2 guys might fall a little bit down. Could be good GPP plays. I've got them marked as core plays on my sheet just because of that place differential upside. I think when I go and highlight my plays, this is my player pool. Now, how much exposure I have really comes down to how much time I have to build lineups. If I'm going to be doing 20, 30, 40, 50 lineups, I'm going to have exposure to all these drivers that I have highlighted. Today, just with football obligations after this, chat and getting lineups out there and stuff like that, building my own lineups as well as building my NASCAR lineups, I'm probably only going to be doing about 3 or 5 lineups on each. So that's why I'm pretty much going to be all in on Denny Hamlin. I'm just going to take that risk. If I'm running a 5 max, I might run 4 with Hamlin, then just 1 without, just to be contrarian, kind of hedge myself that way a little bit. So I talked about Hendrick. They swept qualifying. They're going to be more GPP plays just because they don't have that place differential upside starting 1st to 4th. We got Chase Elliott on the pole. And then we've got slide down. We've got some savings down here at Byron and Bowman. Bowman would probably be my favorite of the Hendrick drivers today. Probably follow that up with Jimmy Johnson. But again, I wouldn't use two max of these guys if you want to be super contrarian, just because you're giving up so many fantasy points by using guys starting top 5. If you don't think they're going to finish, if you think Hendrick dominates and they all hook up early, the front of that pack, and they lead a bunch of laps, you're going to want to get two of them in your lineups. If that's the the script of the race that you think is going to happen, is they're going to get out front, they're going to block, they're going to be able to lead the whole entire first stage pretty much. You're going to want to get two of them in there. I wouldn't use multiple though, just because things can change a ton once that first stage is over. They could lose that lead after the first stage. You get the laps led from one of the drivers, but then they fall back to, say, outside the top 10, top 15. You start losing points, which kind of takes out those points that you gained with the laps led at the start of the race. So it's a risky play. I would probably, if you're building lineups, you want to get a piece of the Hendrick Motorsports starting at the front. Given that script where you think they're going to lead a bunch of laps early, I would pick the driver you think is going to lead. Obviously, for me, that would be Chase Elliott, just because he's starting out front, and I think he, depending on how they hook up, that could be the way they go. Alex Bowman would be, just give me a second here. Yeah, Bowman starting second, so he's on the front row as well. So for me, if you're using one of those Hendrick drivers in a scenario like that, it's Bowman or Elliott, just because they're starting on the front row there this morning or this afternoon. Looking at, one of my favorite plays, he's starting top 10, but he's just been so damn good here, is Joey Logano. Yeah, like I said, he's starting 10th this week, so he does give you a little bit of place differential value. He's got a win. He's the only driver with 4 top 5s in the last 5 races here. He's actually got top 5s in 5 of his last 6 with 2 wins. I believe him and Keselowski, they've got 8 career wins here between them. Definitely more, there's only 2 other drivers, Clint Boyer and Jimmy Johnson, who have multiple wins for their career. Logano's got 3, Keselowski's got 8. So definitely looking at the Fords today. They make a lot of sense, especially in that camp. I think if you want to go a little bit, I think Logano's going to be probably top 5, even though he's starting top 10. I just think with his track history, he's probably going to be top 5 in ownership. And if he isn't, if he falls out the top 5, I love the play even more. Makes a little bit more sense on FanDuel. He is the most expensive driver over there. You're not looking at place differential. It's not as important, so it makes sense why he's the most expensive. Probably have a little bit more exposure there, but still, if he's going to be contrarian and outside the top 5 in ownership on DraftKings, I definitely want a piece of the 22 car here at Talladega. One of my favorite plays of the week for sure. A value play, looking at that Toyota camp, Matt DiBenedetto, he has not been great here. I'm just going to bring up some track history. I forgot to bring up that tab before. Only entering 2 lineups, yeah. Makes sense, Garrett. Okay, so Talladega. I have one to look at. DiBenedetto. Some interesting comments. Bob Pockers was asking him after or before qualifying, I forget, or maybe it was even during practice, but now that he's going to be in a Ford next year and finishing the season in the Toyota, is he going to help the Fords at all this year to finish things off? But he's going to be with the Toyota, as he said. So he's starting 31st this week. Like I said, he hasn't been great at Talladega or super speedways really, but looking here, he has finished at or better than his starting position today in 6 straight races at Talladega, and that goes back to where he was running the 93 car for BK Racing, the 32 car for 4 races for Go Fast Racing, and then with Levine earlier this year, he finished 31st. So I don't think he has a ton of upside, but again, this is Talladega, and if he gets locked up with some of the Toyotas, a top 10 is not outside of the lines for sure. And you're not reaching by thinking that DiBenedetto is going to top 10. They've shown speed in that car on other tracks. He's been on a really good run lately. He's a part of that good team. If Toyota can get things going, they never seem to here at Talladega, but it could be the contrarian way to go today. He's rostering the Toyotas, making that pivot away from the guys in the Ford camp. Even I don't think Hendrick's going to be high owned at all, like I said, just because they're starting 1, 2, 3, 4 at a track where place differential is king. So I think there's some opportunities to build some contrarian lineups today with the variance that there is in super speedway racing. We may see 3-4 crashes. There may be 10 to 15 cars left in the lead lap at the end. So the variance is very high. The big one is going to happen, just a matter of when. So playing against that variance and fading some of these, that's why fading Hamlin would make sense if that's the route that you're going to go. Because there is a ton of variance. He could easily be caught up in one of the first racks trying to make his way through the field and be out in, 38th, 39th, 40th, and, all that ownership is just down the tube. And if he's 65% or 60% owned in GPPs, even 70% owned, and he crashes out early, even if it's not early, and he gets like 30th to 40th place finish, somehow crashes out during the race, that's going to give you leverage, just because 60% of the field is going to be gone. You're going to be, or 30% of the field if he's 70% owned, that's going to be out there. So you're going to be able to get a little bit of leverage that way. I always talk about leverage plays in DFS when playing GPPs and multi-entry. Is there's always someone else that has the very similar upside, but it's going to be half owned, half the ownership, a quarter of the ownership, that type thing. And I always like to look for those plays, especially in high variance sports like this. Hockey's another one. Even in football, you get two elite running backs. One has a little bit better matchup. He's going to be 40% owned, 25% owned in cash. You get another guy that's going to be 10% owned with very, very similar upside. Maybe they don't have the same floor, but sometimes that even happens as well. Well, I'll take the guy that's half the ownership that has a very similar upside, because no one's going to play him. And when that scenario works out, you're going to be ahead of the field and have a better chance to cash. So I don't always do that. There are some chalk plays that I will play, but leverage is definitely something that I look at every single week in every single sport that I play. So keep that in mind. So value is the name of the game. Here, I have no problem leaving money on the table. It's happened before in these winning lineups where you're going to get, sometimes you get 3 or 4 drivers in that 6,500 or less range, or even 7K or less range, that are getting place differential value and in winning lineups, just because of the variance here. So looking at a few, I liked a few before qualifying. I like them a heck of a lot more now. Daniel Hemrick and Ryan Preece. They both had very impressive runs here in the spring in their first race at Talladega. Hemrick started top 5, so he qualified really well, ended up finishing 5th. He finished inside the top 10 in stage 1, so he hung up front pretty much the whole first stage. Second race, he kind of fell back, or second stage. Then he kind of came forward and finished with the top 5. So he was very low owned in that race because he was starting top 5. And then you got Ryan Preece, who was high owned. He started 30th, ended up finishing 3rd in that race. He had elite fantasy points. From a points per dollar perspective, he was the #1 guy there. So they've got a small sample size, these two drivers. But the good thing here this week is that they are starting 29th and 30th. Preece actually showed some top 10 speed out there as well in practice. He's actually #1 in my model right now, because I'm looking at place differential and practice rank a little bit, and then of course track history. And it's a small sample size, so keep that in mind when you're looking at my rankings. That Preece is #1 because it shows that he's #1 in track history, that sort of thing, just because it is a 1-race sample size. And fantasy score, and he started 30th and picked up 27 place differential points or spots, depending on if you're playing FanDuel or DraftKings. So keep that in mind when you're looking at my model, that sample sizes aren't always shown. So when you see that Ryan Preece is #1 in track history, just kind of slide over to that current track history and just see how many races are in that model. So either way, he is one of my top drivers. They're both starting back in the pack. They both got a chance to get another top 10 this year. Like I said, anything is possible. I wouldn't say every driver's got a chance to win this race. Obviously going to be more drivers that have a chance to win here than at, say, a 1.5 mile track or a short track for that matter. But still, I probably wouldn't say it's more than 25 drivers. But those bottom end drivers that we're normally seeing finish 25th and 30th every week in our DFS lineups, we can now look at them like Hemrick and Preece. Talk about Brendan Gaughan here, David Reagan, those guys. This is a race where their upside maybe isn't winning, but a top 10 is definitely, in top 5 is definitely not out of the question for these drivers. And, a win definitely could happen. I don't see it happening, but I see them being really good DFS plays. Even top 20s for these drivers, Hemrick and Preece at low and mid $6,400 range on DraftKings and the 4K range on FanDuel. You can pretty much build any build you want with these drivers. And you can go even lower with Brendan Gaughan. He's been better at Daytona than Talladega, but he is a good plate racer nonetheless. These are the races that he runs. The super speedways are the only races that he runs in NASCAR this season, so definitely be looking at him as a one-off. David Reagan as well. He's got a pretty good track record here for 5,400 at DraftKings, 4,000 on FanDuel. He's got 3 top 10s in the last 5 races at Talladega, and 4 of those are top 25. So definitely be looking at him as well. And with those 4 value plays, those are my 4 favorite value plays, obviously. Mixing them, David Ragan's going to be the lowest. I think if I had to rank these guys, it would be Preece, Hemrick, and then Gahn starting 28th, and then David Ragan starting 17th. Going to be a little bit lower owned than those other guys just because he's not giving you the elite place differential, but he's still, I think he's got top 5, top 10 upside there. So if he's going to be a little bit lower owned, I think he makes a nice GPP pivot off of Gahn, Preece, and Hemrick, who are all more expensive than him and do have that little bit more place differential upside. So that's kind of the leverage play a little bit for me. Newman might be sneaky for GPPs. Yeah, looking at Newman, he's number 2 in my Mahler right now. It's starting 13th. I haven't marked him on my sheet here yet. I probably should have. He's definitely going to be. I'm not going to say he's going to be a core play starting 13th, but he has been solid here. Like his last 6 races here at Talladega went 7th, 25th, 9th, 2nd, 25th, 14th. Before that, it was 28th, 12th, 7th, 5th, 18th, 9th. So he's been very consistently finishing inside the top 20 with top 15s and top 10s there. So I was kind of hoping that he would start a little bit further back in the pack, like 15th to 20th, even outside of that. But he had a pretty good single car run in qualifying. Didn't quite make that final round. He was the guy in the bubble, or final round. They don't do that. But if they were, he was the one that would have missed that final round, starting 13th. So I think with that 13th starting position, him, even Stenhouse starting 7th, Eric Almirola starting 5th, I think all 3 of those drivers are going to be, if you want to build a little bit of a contrarian GPP lineup, that would be a place to go, is that mid-range and that 7K, just because their starting position will dictate a little bit lower ownership. And then with the value guys at the bottom that I just talked about, Hemrick, Preece, Gahn, and Ragan, it makes it very easy to build a lineup and get Busch, Truex, Harvick, Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, 2 or 3 of these top drivers in your lineup. So I think with that kind of build of stars and scrubs, I think that does leave a nice gap in the mid tier where we can build some, we can really attack it at a GPP, perspective there. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. So I definitely agree with you that Newman could be a little bit overlooked here, and he's at a good price. I wouldn't go ahead and mix, like I talked about, Newman, Almirola, and Stenhouse. Stenhouse was 1 here. Almirola's 1 here. They've both been really good at this track. They've also both been very good on plate tracks. So I really didn't want to see drivers that were that good on plate tracks start this close forward. But I definitely won't be running multiple of those drivers. I'll be running 1. If I'm going to be picking and trying to get one of these low-owned guys from the mid-tier, I'm going to be picking 1 of those to mix in with some of the chalk guys. Not multiple. I wouldn't run Almirola and Stenhouse together, or Newman and Stenhouse, or Newman and Almirola. It's going to be 1 of those guys. And then I'll probably mix 1 of those guys in with the Benedetto, even Hemrick and Preece, Gahn, those guys below, just to try and mix things up. If you want to be a little bit different, lineup construction is going to be very easy with this place differential. It always is. You could really sit down and build 500 lineups and not, well, eventually you're going to run out of combinations. But my point is it's easier to build this week than other weeks. So people are going to tend to go towards the easy routes where you can get the guys with place differential and load up on that. So to be contrarian, pivot away from one of those guys and put someone that's starting a little bit further forward and that's going to be a little bit lower on, just to, differentiate yourself a little bit in your lineup construction. Yeah, Ricky does get in crashes, but he's 12 races at Talladega in his career. He's got the second best. Actually, if you're looking at drivers that have more than 1 race here at Talladega, he's got the best average finish. 11.8 average finish in 12 career races. He's got a win in those 12 races. He's finished top 5 times with 7 top 10s. He's finished inside the top 20 in 9 of those 12 races. So while he is, Recky Spinhouse, or whatever you want to call him, it's not exactly the case here at Talladega. So I wouldn't just automatically fade him just because of that. I mean, I think he's going to be low owned just because of where he's starting. 7th. I think people will go to Newman over Stenhouse. I think people will go to Almirola over Stenhouse. I think people will go up to De Benedetto or down to Hemrick and Preece. So I think Stenhouse is going to be, very low owned, starting 7th. And he's won here before. He started from the pole and he won. So, he doesn't have a ride for next year at this moment. So he's kind of out there with something to prove. So I think he's going to be aggressive, like he always is. trying to make up those spots or whatever when it comes to this. But Talladega has been one of his very best tracks. And if he's going to be low owned at one of his very best tracks, he's got something to prove. I definitely want a piece of that in my lineups today. And not a whole bunch. Like I said, these low owned drivers in any sport, any low owned driver, any low owned player in any other sport, you don't need, the thing about rostering these guys when you're doing these leverage plays, you don't need to be, if you're doing 10 lineups, you don't need to have 5 with Ricky Stenhouse in there. You could have 2, and then you've automatically got more than the field. You could have 1 in 10 lineups, you're going to have more than the field. So that's how you get your leverage that way, but you don't really have to overexpose yourself to Stenhouse or those lower owned plays in your lineups and really get yourself susceptible to, losing out on one crash type thing. Oh, we got a bomb here from Winston. To Evans, juggle. No, incomplete pass. Looks like the Panthers got control of this at halftime. Is there a no-go zone as far as tier, scrub drivers, or is everybody on board? Pretty much everyone. I've got my drivers labeled on my members-only sheet that you can get on RotoPros or DFSR chat. Almost, I think, when it comes to super speedway racing, the player pool really opens up to almost everybody in the field. I mean, you could even go down. I'm not looking at, Spencer Boyd, Austin Terry. I'm not going to have time to do 20, 50, 100 lineups today, or I probably would start getting down into that low tier. The lowest I'm going, which I just mentioned, the 4 guys that I'm looking at from a value perspective, the cheapies this week would be Daniel Hemrick, Ryan Preece, Brendan Gaughan, and David Reagan, kind of in that sub 7K range on DraftKings and the sub 5K range on FanDuel. Those are the 4 that I'm going to mix into my player pool. But yeah, generally when you get to these super speedway races, your player pool expands by quite a bit. You pretty much just you really got to decide. You have to narrow your own personal player pool down when you're building your lineups, especially if you're only doing 5, 10 lineups. You don't want to hedge yourself on every single lineup. For instance, building a Hendrick lineup and then a Ford lineup. And the reason I go with cores, and when I say cores, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 3 drivers in my lineup. So I'm just going to pick 3 out here. Let's say we go Joey Logano. Because I said, he's really good here at Talladega. I'm going to mix him with Denny Hamlin, who's going to be the chalk starting 40th. And then, go down to, I said Ryan Preece is my favorite value play. I'm going to stick those 3 guys. If I'm building 10 lineups, I'm going to stick those 3 drivers in about 6 or 7 of my lineups. And then I'm going to, switch in the other 3 drivers, mix and match. In those 6 or 7 lineups, I may add a 4th driver in 2 or 3 of them and then mix in the other 2. I want to get as much exposure to my core as possible so that when that core goes off, say Hamlin comes forward, finishes top 10, gets big time place differential points, Logano wins the race, Ryan Preece comes forward, say he finishes 15th, somewhere in there, he gets good place differential points, all 3 of my core drivers go off. I now have 6 different lineup combinations, or 7, or however many you're doing, different combinations to get that perfect lineup together and end up winning that GPP, versus you just have one lineup with that 3 core drivers, they go off, and you have a driver that wrecked out in that lineup, you're dead. That core is automatically dead. So by building core and then going in, some weeks that core may wreck out. You may have 2 of those drivers that are involved in the first wreck, and 70% of your lineups are dead. But on the flip side, I would rather take a 0 from that week and have a chance at actually winning the GPP the next or whatever, than hedging myself and still losing on Sunday. But you got to be way more perfect with your one lineup for it to, to win that GPP. So that's just kind of the way I look at it from a core building standpoint. If you want to learn more, definitely hit me up in the RotoPros chat room, in the DFSR chat room, on Twitter at Jaeger_bombs. I can definitely help you a little bit more with that core building, but I'm definitely against hedging against myself in my lineups. I do that the same for NFL. I'll put a wide receiver, a quarterback, my favorite running back together, even a defense that I really like, or a tight end, 4 players. I'll put them together in a lineup, and then I'll go build 5 to 10 lineups around that core. So when that wide receiver quarterback combo goes off, 2 touchdowns and 100 yards for the receiver, the quarterback throws for 3 or 4 touchdowns, 300 plus yards. The defense, doesn't have to do great, but say that, they get 10 to 12 points on defense. I've got that many more lineups to try and get the rest of the lineup perfect. So that's kind of the way I build. You're welcome, Dakota. Thanks for everyone that joined today. I'm going to be heading off here. Got to start building some lineups. Got to get to the NFL lineups here as well. Again, thanks for joining me. I'll be back next week as we get into the final race of this round. I believe we get to Kansas next week, and then we're into the round of 8. So things are getting interesting. Yeah, I hope CMC gets in a touchdown too. But enjoy the football, enjoy the race, stay away rain. Thanks for joining me. Make sure to head over to rotopros.com, dailyfantasysportsrankings.com. Got free trials if you're not a customer. I've got my members-only cheat sheets there with highlighted plays, extra write-ups, extra stats, stuff like that. So make sure to get over, check that out. Cheers. Let's go get some green screens, everyone. Good luck today.